So I have to say, I'm glad I finally got through some of the bigger names on the offensive side of the ball because I've been waiting to sink my teeth into the defensive side of the ball in this draft class. There are a lot of players on the defensive side of the ball that I really, really like and really, really love. And, it'll be a lot more fun, frankly, to talk about some of these guys. Now, ultimately, the most talked about defensive prospect in this draft class, and frankly, the most talked about draft prospect, period, for 2017 is Myles Garrett. It fits similar to a Clowney situation in the standpoint of people have been waiting 3 years for him to become a top five, arguably number one overall pick. That was going back to Clowney's freshman year. Even as you talk about him entering in sophomore year, people talk about if he should even play because he could run the risk of injuring himself. And then as soon as he got the chance after his junior year, he was gone from South Carolina. And Myles Garrett has elicited some of those comparisons, some of those conversations. And when you watch him on film, it's easy to understand why people really like this kid. Um, Even going back to the combine, I felt like there was a lot of narrative setting about this kid going on by the commentators and the announcers and the talking heads on the NFL Network in particular, but there just has been in general throughout the media in this entire draft process, emphasizing how much of a freak he is, how much of a freak he is. And even I tweeted during the combine at one point in time after the 40s that I didn't think he was that much of a freak. Then, of course, he went out and did what he did in the vertical and the broad jump, and, I kind of got to eat crow a little bit on that one. He is an athletic freak. He's not the only athletic freak in this draft class, even amongst defensive linemen, but he is a freak. I will admit that. I'll admit when I was wrong. Yes, he's a fucking athletic freak. Frankly, he's a more athletic freak than Jadeveon Clowney was coming out of South Carolina 3 years ago. So what do people really like about him? He's 6'5", 270 pounds. So he has the size to be able to be 4-3 defensive end. You're not going to hear about tweener labels on him. Even though when you look at a guy like Solomon Thomas, who is almost the same size and actually is a little bit heavier, people view him as a bit of a tweener. It's weird. I don't know how this fucking works sometimes. But you look at Myles Garrett and you say if he dropped a little bit of weight, he probably could fit into a 3-4 as well. As an outside linebacker, if he bulked up some, he might be able to be a 3-4 defensive end. I think the 3-4 defensive end talk might be a bit extreme. He could play as a 3-4 edge rusher and I think do pretty well, but his best natural position is as a 4-3 defensive end. Incredible burst and explosiveness off of the ball. His first step is outstanding. His second step is outstanding. He's got great athleticism in terms of his agility, his ability to start and stop very quickly. You see it on film consistently where when he's right and when he's healthy, there's multiple times in a game where the only contact the offensive tackle makes with Myles Garrett is on his back. He's blocking him in the back, basically. And the crazy thing is that his get off the ball is great, even though his snap recognition and anticipation is inconsistent. He'll have times where it looks like he's offsides, and he has other times he's a little bit late off the ball. But when you're that explosive and it shows up on film that consistently and in the game that consistently, it probably doesn't matter. If he got any better in that, he would be borderline illegal. Incredibly strong kid, too. You talk about these guys with this type of athletic package from a quickness and speed standpoint, and explosiveness standpoint. You want to view him and kind of pigeonhole him almost as being more of a finesse type of player. And Myles Garrett is not a finesse type of player solely. This is a kid that won't get pancaked in the running game. He's able to anchor, hold his ground. He's very, very good at bull rushing offensive tackles. One warning to NFL teams, you do not want to get into the habit of consistently blocking them with a running back or a tight end because that's not going to end well for you because he's just going to own them. What I love the most about Myles Garrett is the fact that from a pass rush standpoint, he's outstanding from a technique from technique. Really good at shedding blocks, plays with really good leverage and pad level in my estimation. And his pass rush ability is otherworldly in terms of a kid coming out of college into the NFL. I think he's far superior as a pure pass rusher than Clowney was. I don't think it's close. He's better athletically, and he's so much more of a finished product as a pass rusher. He truly is. He's got pretty much all the pass rush moves, able to bend the edge consistently. He's got a nice natural feel on stunts, and really good at figuring out ways to create a crease to be able to split double teams. Just outstanding. Like in terms of pure pass rush skill, he's one of the most skilled that I've seen in a very, very long time. As a pure pass rusher, just outstanding to watch on film. He really is. And one of the things I like about him too was that in 2016, coming into his junior year, one of the knocks against him, legitimately so, was that he wasn't much as a run defender, and that he was lacking as a run defender. And that was true. It was a valid complaint. But you could see where he wanted to become a more complete player. You could see where he wanted to work at his craft and get better. He wasn't just content with riding his outstanding pass rush skills, ability, and upside to the NFL level. He wanted to become a more complete player. He wanted to unlock the greatness potential that lies within. And he improved as a run defender. Um, he's still not great at it, but he's much, much better. I think he's at least adequate. He's not a guy that you automatically have to take off the field now in clear-cut running situations where, as a freshman and sophomore, I think you could have entertained that. Um, Sometimes he gets a little caught up in watching the play versus going and making the plays, but he held up better. I thought he worked a little bit harder when he was engaged by blockers. Um, but I think, and I'll talk about it in a minute, his lack of desire and pursuit in 2016, injury or not, was a real turnoff to me in some ways. But again, it's like with him, from a technique standpoint, from an actual playing the game standpoint, there are just not a lot of physical flaws. There are just not a lot of fundamental flaws. I have two major concerns about Myles Garrett. And there are two major concerns that wouldn't prevent me from taking him in the top 5. There are two major concerns that might prevent me from taking him number 1 overall. The first one is effort and motor. I feel like as a pass rusher, he gives consistent and hard effort. He's a beast, and he plays like a beast. It can wane a little bit if the quarterback starts to roll out of the pocket, but if the quarterback is there in the pocket, he will beast up, and he will come, and he will come, and he will come until he gets there or the whistle is blown. With that said, his effort in pursuit, his effort in the running game to try and chase plays down the field is absolutely pathetic. At least it was in 2016. Now, to be fair to him, I did go back and watch 2015 as well with him, and I thought his effort level was better in 2015. So there could be a part of that that says he was slowing down a little bit to protect himself for the draft, a la I think Joey Bosa coming in last year's draft. And some of that was, the fact in this particular case that he was battling an ankle injury throughout a good portion of 2016. So maybe the coaching staff told him to don't go after it as hard. Maybe he made a conscientious decision, a business decision, to not go after it so hard. But sometimes it really concerns me when a guy can show one level of effort, then the next year they don't show a level of effort, and then we're expecting him to flip the switch and turn it right back on again. And for me, especially when it comes to defensive players, and in particular pass rushers, I think effort and motor are critical, and they are so important, sometimes more than technique. A lot of times it is about will versus skill. And his will as a run defender and chasing the plays down, I thought was absolutely lacking. It was frankly pathetic. Um, so you have to ask, is this a kid that just did that because he had millions of dollars at stake and he made a smart business decision? Perhaps. You know, that's a fair question to ask. Unlike some other guys like Fournette and McCaffrey, at least he played in his team's bowl game when he didn't have to. And you could definitely maybe argue in his case, based off of the millions of dollars that was at stake, he very well shouldn't have, but he did. So I think that could speak a little bit to love of football. And I think the kid does love football, and it shows in the way he conducts and carries himself and in general plays. But again, I have concerns about a kid whose effort waned that much from one year to the next. Because what happens if your team starts out bad? Is he not going to try as hard? What happens if he's in a contract year? Is he going to do just enough when it's easy to get himself paid as much money as possible, but when it's tough, he's going to back off? Is that the type of attitude, mentality, and mindset that you want out of a kid like Myles Garrett, who, if you're the Cleveland Browns in particular, you're entertaining the thought very strongly of taking him number 1 overall? If you're taking that defensive end number 1 overall, he better be all pro and he better be damn near Hall of Fame worthy, especially in a strong draft class like this year's draft class. And when a guy has questionable effort and motor and you see it on film, it really gives you pause and makes you wonder. Similar to a Bosa, similar to a Clowney. And there's varying results there. Clowney's finally come into his own, but he ultimately had to switch to being a 3-4 defensive end. And it took him 3 years to get there. Bosa played well in stretches as a rookie, but even if you go back and watch the film sometimes, he looked so good because at times he just wasn't blocked at all. Like nobody touched him. Like they didn't even account for him on defense. So a lot of the plays he made was when he had a clean shot to the quarterback. His effort level was far superior in San Diego in 2016 than it was in Ohio State in 2015. I resent this notion when people say that Bosa was always a high effort, high energy, high motor type of player. Bullshit. And if you watch the film, you would fucking know that. Same thing with Clowney in his junior year in South Carolina in 2013. I will say I think Myles Garrett's effort was overall better than both of them, but it is similar. The other concern I have is durability. This is a guy that had a high ankle sprain that he dealt with throughout 2016. He's had several different injuries of different severities throughout his college career. He missed multiple games during his career and was limited in several others, had to come out of game action for some of them. Again, you're not talking about just taking this dude in the first round. You're not just talking about taking this dude in the top half of the first round or even the top 10 or even just the top 5. You're talking about possibly taking this kid with a top 3 pick. How risky is it to take a kid like this who had some injuries in college? It's going to come into the NFL and it's going to be one of these Courtney Brown situations that when he's healthy, he can be a beast, but he's never healthy, and therein lies the problem. I think they are valid concerns. When I look at Myles Garrett overall as a prospect, I think the dude is a stud. And I think it'd be a crime if he's not a multiple-time Pro Bowler or borderline all-pro type of talent at the NFL level. I don't know if he has Hall of Fame stuff, but he has some really, really good stuff. My final grade for him is a 93.0. The best NFL comparison I could think of was a Jason Pierre-Paul in terms of similar height and length type of profile and strength and just freakish type of athleticism. And with JPP, he'll have stretches of games when he's not blowing his fingers off with fireworks. He can be absolutely dominant. He can be a tear off the edge. Then you have other times and other games and sometimes other seasons where it's not so much. So I think there are definitely some similarities there. Now the question you ask yourself is, do I have him rated as the number 1 prospect on my draft board? And the answer is absolutely not. He's top 5, but he's not number 1. He's not even the number 1 defensive lineman. He's not even the number 1 defensive end. In fact, he's the number 3 defensive lineman on my board in this draft. Now, that is not meant as a major knock or hate on Myles Garrett. Because again, let me emphasize, I think the dude's a stud. I think he has stud potential. And at the end of the day, I would be happy if I ended up with him with a top 5 pick. There are concerns there, yes, but the dude is a stud in the making. And I can see why the media is so in love with him, and some NFL teams are so in love with him when they talk about the fact that he's a man amongst boys, and every time he gets on the field, he's always the best player on the field. When they play a team like Alabama, I would dispute that, and I'll talk about one of those players here in a little bit. But again, I think the dude's a stud. He's my number 3 rated defensive lineman, but right now, as my board currently sits, the top 3 rated players on my board are all defensive linemen. So it's, again, not a huge knock, and even the difference between the number 1 lineman, the number 2 lineman, and Myles Garrett is not very big. And frankly, if he played with a better effort level and he didn't have the injury concerns, he would be my number 1 prospect on the draft board, and there would actually be a larger margin between him and every other prospect in this draft. The dude's a stud. The Cleveland Browns sitting at number 1 overall. Leave it to the Browns to fuck it up and get the number 1 overall pick in a year where there's not a quarterback really worth taking number 1. But getting a guy like Myles Garrett with his potential and upside is the right move for them. If you're some other teams, I might advocate for taking one of these other defensive linemen that I like just a little bit more. But for the Cleveland Browns, he's the safest option. He's the smartest option. And to me, frankly, at this point in time, he's the best and only option that they have. They need impact difference makers. Myles Garrett can be and should be one of those at the NFL level.